Welcome to another tutorial, and let's get started right away. And I'll create a new file, a new project, and new composition. Make this full HD and maybe make this 10 seconds long. Alright, let's name this composition main, and let's go ahead and press Ctrl Y and create a new solid. Then for this solid I will add a ramp effect. Double click to add this effect. Let's set this to radial and let's move these points around, and I'm holding down shift while I'm moving the points. And for this first color I'll use a gray, and for my second color I'll use a dark, or rather a 100% black, and move the points around, so end up with something like this. And this is fine for now. Let's add a new solid and let's name this noise, and let's name our first layer BG for background. And this noise layer, I'm gonna go ahead and add a fractional noise, set the noise type to block. Let's set the contrast maybe to 25. Let's set the complexity to 1.25, just because it's a nice number for me. And wow, it rounded it up to 1.3, whatever. Let's go ahead and animate the evolution and give this noise some life. And the first expression, and probably the easiest one I'm going to be using this entire video, is the time expression, and you're probably familiar with this. So hold down Alt and left click the stopwatch for the evolution property, and type in time multiplied by 150. Alright, and this makes it nice and animated. Alright, that's it for now for this layer. Let's press F4 and turn this into a 3D layer, and press W to switch to my rotate tool and rotate this on the X axis. Maybe just give it a slight rotation, and let's bring this down. And let's press S for scale and turn off uniform scaling, and maybe stretch this and stretch this out just so it completely covers the width of this composition, maybe, and just stretch this enough just so it's at the end of the bottom of the composition here. Maybe give it less of an angle and stretch this out. Let's go to the transform properties for this fractional noise, and let's adjust the scale here, and this is completely up to you. I like it to have kind of like a stretched effect going. Maybe even more stretch. I don't know, doesn't really matter that much. And maybe less of an angle here. Yep, and stretch this out. Alright, let's not spend too much time on this. This is just more sort of like a fill layer for all of the other compositions that we're gonna be adding, so it really doesn't matter that much. Should be good. Now we can animate the noise coming towards the camera, which is the idea here. So this is the movement that I'm looking for. So I can achieve this by using the offset property here, but instead what I'm going to do is add an effect called offset. Let's double click this guy, and pretty much does kind of the same thing. If I move the second value of the shift center to property. Alright, so you can kind of see what this does. And in order to not use keyframes, I'm gonna go ahead and use an expression for this as well. So Alt and left click the stopwatch here, and I want to affect only the second property of this effect, of this property rather. So this is how the property looks if I don't do anything. You have to open and close brackets, and my value is 960, 540. Alright, so this is essentially my value here. So instead of this 540, what I can do is I can choose time multiplied by, again, 150. Alright, so now this will create this animation, and this changes just the second value of my parameter. Alright, so it creates this expression, this animation that sort of coming towards the camera, which is what we want. Alright, that's good for now. Let's create a new composition, and let's name this stripe. Let's set the width to 20 and height to 1000, and let's make sure that this This has a higher duration than our original comp, which is 10 seconds, so I'm just gonna go ahead and choose 1 minute and 10 seconds, and that gives us enough room of animation to work with, so we can offset layers and so forth. Let's hit OK, enter here. Let's create a new solid, so Control Y, hit OK, and I'm gonna grab my rectangle tool, double click to add a mask. Alright, so this is the mask. Double click the edges of this mask, and now I can hold Control and scale this down, and you can kind of see what I'm sort of creating here. And what I want to do now with this layer is simply animate this going from below our composition. So from here, going all the way upwards until it leaves the composition. So in order to do this, we can press P for position. Let's right click this and choose separate dimensions, because I only want to work with the Y position. Alright, and set a keyframe at the beginning of my timeline for Y position when it's below our comp, and maybe at around the 5-second mark. I'm just gonna drag this up until it leaves the composition from above. Alright, so we end up with this animation, and I want to loop these keyframes because I want this kind of animation to happen throughout the whole composition. And let's Alt left click the stopwatch, and the expression will be loop out, so that's with a capital O. Alright, loop out, and it's very important that you capitalize the O. And then I will open and close parentheses, and I will type apostrophe cycle apostrophe. So that's loop out, and in between parentheses you will have cycle, which is in between apostrophes, right? So just make sure to check out the description of the video, and I will lay out all of the expressions there in case, I don't know, you mistype something or whatever. Just check out the description if you get stuck. Alright, so now this essentially will loop out my animation. So now what I can do with this stripe is I can place this inside a new composition. And this composition, I will go to composition settings, and essentially what I want to do is take this stripe and duplicate this horizontally like 20 times, or actually I think 40 times. Let's see, so if I would multiply this 40 times, this would give me a width of 800. Yep, so this is enough to work with, I think. Alright, so just hit OK here. And so here's what I want to do. I want to set this to be right at the edge of my composition, and you can hold Control Shift to snap it to the edge of the composition. And if whenever I duplicate this, I want this to be offsetted by the width of the layer, so they're kind of sticking together, and I want to fill out the entire width of the composition by duplicating the layers. So in order to do this, I can go to position, press P. Let's choose separate dimensions, and I want to offset the X position, and this is the expression that I'm going to use. Will be index, which is the number of the layer, multiplied by 20, which is the width of the layer. So if I now duplicate the composition, you can see that it's sort of, they're all really next to each other. All the layers are next to each other, and we can fill up the entire composition like that. But let's delete these, and you can see there's a slight problem here that this expression basically kind of offsetted the position a bit, and it's no longer near the edge of the composition, which is kind of a problem. And in order to fix this, you can add plus value to our stripe layer, and now I can move it and snap it back in our original place. One other thing I want to do here is I want to give each copy of this stripe layer a different speed. So for example, if I right click this layer and go to time and enable time remapping, I can add an expression to this, which will be value. Alright, so if I just leave this at value, this will just give me the regular time, so it moves at the normal speed. But for example, if I take this value expression and multiply this by 2, now this will move at twice the speed. Alright, so instead of multiplying this by 2, I want to multiply it by a random number between, let's say, 0.5 and 2, maybe. So each time I duplicate the layer, it will give me a new random number to multiply the value by, and it will create a nice random, it will give all the layers different speeds and create a nice random effect. So I hope that makes sense so far. And the expression will be seed random, and in between parentheses I will type 1 comma true, and this will just give me a seed random. And to generate the random number itself, let's set it to a variable first. So I'll type x. This can be any letter you want, or it doesn't matter, it can be a, b, or whatever. I'm just going to go with x. Space equals, and the expression is random. All right, and in between parentheses I can choose the number from where to generate the random number, so 0.5 comma 2. All right, so if you want a higher offset, you can choose whatever values you want here, but in order to keep the speeds of these layers, I don't want them to be too extreme one from each other. So I'm just gonna go with nice values of 0.5 and 2. What else here? Also, it's very important that the seed random, the R within the seed random is capital, so keep that in mind. Alright, and then I will just simply take the value and multiply it by our random number, so which is x. Alright, so now if I duplicate a layer a bunch of times, you can see that it creates, every layer has a different speed, and it creates this nice random effect. I think that's it for our stripe. Let's actually go in our stripe composition itself, and let's maybe add another layer here, and I'll call this BG. I'll put my BG layer below our original layer, so this is stripe or whatever. I'll take my BG layer and I'll press T for opacity, set the opacity to 20%, and I'm just gonna add a wiggle expression to this, just so the background flickers a bit. Let's see, maybe a wiggle, and in between parentheses go with 1 and 25 probably. Alright, so now you can see as I scroll that the background kind of flickers. And let's also add a slight flicker to our stripe layer, which is the one on top. So opacity, let's set this maybe to 75%, and let's add another wiggle here, again 1. If you want the flicker to be more intense, you can, so the speed of the flicker is controlled by the first value, which in this case is 1. So if I would put in here 2, it will flicker a lot faster. Alright, so 1 should be fine. And the offset value itself, maybe go for 25 or maybe 35. Alright, so if I preview an animation here, I think maybe the flicker is a little too fast for our background, so let's set the first value here to 0.5 and should be fine. Let's go back to our stripe 2 comp, and I'm actually gonna rename this composition to stripe underscore comp just to keep things organized. Let's take a look at the let's make a slight preview here. Right, so this is the result. You can see that they start at the same time, and then as the speeds alter, it creates this nice random effect. Pretty cool. I think that's fine. So now I can just grab this layer, press Ctrl D, and just duplicate this until it's all filled up. So Ctrl D, Ctrl D, and yep. It's good. Let's go back into our main composition and let's drop this stripe comp. Let's set this to be 3D, and let's use the same transform properties from our noise layer. So I'm gonna go ahead and select the transform properties here, Control C, grab my stripe comp and Control V. Alright, let's press S for scale and make sure that this is stretched out all the way towards the edge of the composition here. And I'm actually gonna stretch this out on the X value, maybe just a bit, something like that. And in order to fill out the entire width of this composition, you can add a effect called motion tile. Alright, double click this and simply increase the output width. And this simply repeats it over on the width. Alright, so you create this nice effect. And you can see that they start all at the same time, and I'm just gonna offset this layer. So this is why we made our stripe layer like 1 minute instead of 10 seconds, just so we have room to work with within our animation. And I can see that the stripes are going the wrong way, and I'm just gonna grab the rotation tool here, which is W, and just flip this around 180 degrees. Alright, so far so good. I think that's looking good. Let's actually add the camera. Let's go to layer and add a, oh, not null object, whoops. So layer, new camera. I'm making mine 90 degrees angle of view. Hit OK, and you can see that this stretches out nicely, and it's kind of this forced perspective, which creates more, just accentuates animation. It's you know, a higher angle in motion graphics usually always looks better, so it's something to keep in mind. And maybe stretch this. Let's readjust the layers a bit and increase the output height here so it fills out the composition. And also this guy below it. Let's solo this. See exactly what we're doing here, but it should be alright. Let's see what's next. Alright, let's duplicate this camera now and grab either of these camera duplicates with our stripe comp. So that's hold Control and Control Shift C to pre-compose, or you can go to composition and let's see which one was it. I never used this one. I think it's, oh yeah, it's actually layer. Alright, so layer, pre-compose, you can see Control Shift C, and this will be my stripe 3D. Alright, seems fine. So what I can do with this now is I can grab my rectangle tool and draw a mask here. Let's see, maybe something like that. Alright, press F for feather. Let's feather this out, and let's create a duplicate, so Control D. Let's set this, the one below, to subtract. And for the one above, let's add an effect called, actually I think the one below. Alright, so for this one, let's add an effect called find edges. Right double click to add and set the find edges to invert. And alright, unsolo this, set this layer to add, and press T for opacity, and maybe set the opacity to 60%, and also set opacity for the one above it to maybe 75 should be fine. Alright, so that takes care of that. Let's take a look what else. Let's actually grab one of these compositions, so the stripe comp, or actually let's grab it from my project window. So back in my main composition, I'm gonna go ahead and grab the stripe comp, right, and I'm simply gonna place this up here where the edges meet and stretch this out a bit, and also add a motion tile effect to this and stretch this out on the output width. Grab my mask tool and also mask this and feather this towards the top here. Alright, and set the opacity for this maybe to 25, and also add a fast blur to this and set this to maybe 5. Blurriness, alright, looks alright. Let's maybe take care of our next thing. Let's make a composition, new composition, and I'll name this square. I'm gonna make this 50 but maybe 35, I think 35 by 35. Let's hit OK and create a new layer, and I want to animate this square sort of like this, so press S for scale and start with a scale of 25. Move forward, let's work with frames here, so move forward 15 frames, set this to 100 and press T for opacity, and when it reaches 100 I want this to flicker a bit, so let's add some keyframe sphere for opacity just to create that flicker, and then fade this out to 0. Let's see how this looks. Yeah, that should be fine. So now I want this animation to loop. Alright, so I'm just gonna press U to bring out all of my keyframes, and I'll add another keyframe for opacity at the start and another keyframe for scale at the end, just so they both loop uniformly. And the loop expression is the one we used earlier. Loop out cycle, and copy this to opacity. So now if I play this, all right, seems to be working fine. One thing here is that I want this maybe to, so when it fades to black, I want this to remain black for like an extra second. And we can do this if I copy the last keyframe for the opacity, which is 0. Go ahead and Control C and just copy this later in our timeline, and also copy the last keyframe for my scale. So these have to have the same distance between keyframes, just so they're uniform. And now if I play this back, you should see like a small pause between the fade out. Alright, that should be fine. Let's go ahead, and for this square I'll drop it in a new comp, and this comp will be square comp. Width will be 1500 and height 1000, and should be fine. Let's move this forward a bit. So I want to grab this square, and each time I duplicate this square I want this to be in a different position in the whole composition. So in order to do this, we can go to position. Let's right click and separate dimensions, and I just want to generate a random value for the X position between 0 and 1500, which is the width of the composition. And for the Y position, it's going to be a random value between 0 and 1000, which is the height of the composition. So let's add our random expression. So seed random 1 and true. X, now let's just go random. If you don't assign a variable to your random, it will just use the number that is generated. So we don't need to assign a variable in this case. So I'm just going to type random and 0 1500. Copy this to our Y position, and for our Y position we need the height here, so I'm just gonna go with 0 and 1000. So now each time I grab this layer and duplicate, it will give it a new position anywhere inside this whole composition, which is fine. Let's delete these, and some other things we want to adjust here is, let's see, I want the scale. So let's go to scale here, and let's turn off uniform scaling, and I want to assign a random number to our X value and our Y value individually. And in order to do this, let's add our expression. So seed random 1 true, and X will be a number between 25 and 150 maybe. Alright, and now I have to take care of my Y value, and again seed random, and instead of using 1 here, I will just have to use a different seed number, because I want different values for both the X and the Y. So if you just go with 1 and true, and you give the Y the same random, oh actually I forgot to type in random here. Right, so random between 25 and 150, and then random 25 and 150, and then use these variables in my in the final output, like so. Alright, you can see that these are the exact same values, and whenever I duplicate, it just scales down uniformly. So I don't want that, and in order to change this, for our Y seed random, we can just use a different number here, 5 or anything else, and now you can see that this is a different value. So whenever I duplicate this, now some of these will be stretched, and just create a more interesting effect. Let's delete these, and one final thing for this square layer is add a enable time remapping. And basically here I want each layer to start at a different time. So let's say, for example, that for this layer I wanted to start at the 5-second mark. I would go something like value plus 5. So instead of 5, I will just add a random number between 0 and 5. So let's type seed random 1 true, and x equals random. So there's a number between 0 and 5, and then I will simply use value plus x. So now each layer will start at a different time. So when I duplicate this a bunch of times, just hold Control D, maybe even more. Alright, we end up with something like this, which is kind of cool, kind of techy, kind of organic, or whatever. You can even add more of these. Alright, you kind of get the idea. So back in our main comp, let's drop our square comp in the composition. Let's set this to add, and let's go ahead and make this a 3D layer and grab our transform properties for our noise. Alright, and make sure, let's solo this. And let's readjust the scale for this, and also add a motion tile effect and extend the width. Let's see, maybe just the position. Should be fine. Let's maybe place this more. I think this works. Let's also add a glow to this. Stylize glow. Make these pop out a little bit more. I'm also gonna set the opacity for this layer to maybe 70%. I think that's fine. And also for this layer I want the squares to be coming towards the camera like the rest of the elements. So in our noise layers, remember we use that offset effect to drive our squares towards the camera. So I'm just gonna go ahead and copy this effect to our square comp, and now we have this simple animation of squares coming towards us. Let's unsolo this layer. Right, one final thing here is to add our flare, and well, if you have optical flares you should definitely use that, but trying to keep these plugins free, let's just create a fake flare, and this is gonna look awful, but whatever, just use optical flares if you have it, please. Oh wait, not this guy, new composition. Alright, so this will be flare, and let's maybe make it 2500 width and height 1000, should be fine. Add a new layer and grab my ellipse tool and add a ellipse mask. Just scale this down. This is gonna look awful, but whatever, man, it's plugins free like advertised. This should be fine. Duplicate this layer and maybe increase the feather for the layer below it. Let's maybe make a new layer and add another ellipse here, and this will be the center of our flare. Let's maybe add a fast blur to this. Let's switch to horizontal and increase the value. I think that's decent. Just whatever, I guess this will work. Just use a normal flare, but let's drop this in and see how it looks. Set this to add, and I'm pressing the arrow keys to place this in position. That's actually not bad at all. Let's solo this layer, and here's a trick you can do. In order to obtain like a flare flicker, you can go to scale and add a wiggle expression to this. So wiggle maybe 1.5 and 35. Alright, so now it kind of creates this wiggle effect right, and solo this. Let's take care of our colors now. Let's add a new adjustment layer here. New adjustment layer. Let's add an effect, color correction, curves. Let's drop the midtones quite a bit. Let's maybe go to our square comp and let's set the opacity to 60%. Alright, and add a tritone to this. Just an easy way to color correct it. Try to find a nice blue to work with and add a stylized glow. Alright, and spread the glow out. Maybe leave the threshold at 60. Kind of like this. Kind of like this look. Let's add another. Let's actually add our fake depth of field. So let's create a layer, and I'm gonna go ahead and add an ellipse. Set the mask to subtract. Press F for feather and feather this out. Alright, and Control-Shift-C to pre-compose the layer, and this will be my depth map. And turn off the layer, we don't need to see this. In our adjustment layer, add a camera lens blur. Set the blur map layer to depth map, and maybe blur radius to 15. Turn on repeat edge pixels, and you can see we have nice fake depth of field. Alright, pretty cheesy, but works. Especially since the camera isn't really moving. Maybe add another color correction, curves, and let's maybe crank up the contrast a little bit more. Alright, and this is kinda too blue. We can go to our green channel and grab the high value of our green curve here and just increase the green highlights. This kinda makes it adds a little bit more variation instead of it being just a lot of blue. You can also, something you can do is go to your red channel, and if you increase the red shadows, you can also get like a pretty cool effect, especially if you can see it right here at the top. So the shadows will have sort of like this red tint. So that's also something you can try, but let's actually set the red back to where it was. You can experiment with this, but yeah, that's pretty much it. So thanks for watching. Hope you learned something new. Leave a comment, tell me what you think. Hopefully the expressions I managed to explain them kind of decently. If not, do check the description where I'll lay out all of the expressions. I'll also leave a link to where you can find more information about the random expression, since it's very powerful and I use it pretty much all the time. But that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. Take care.